and welcome to today's webcast, sponsored by American Forests, Building Back Better After Wildfire. I'm Heather Clancy, the editorial director of GreenBiz, and I am thrilled to see you today, wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in. Before we begin, I have the requisite housekeeping details. The screen you're looking at has a number of features I'd like to point out. So you can resize and move around the various windows on the webcast platform to optimize your viewing experience. On the bottom of the screen, there's a toolbar with various buttons. So for example, you can download the slides from today's webcast and other resources by clicking on the button marked Resources. If you have questions for today's speakers, click on the Q&A button and type your questions into the window that appears. We'll be fielding questions later on in the program, but you can ask at any time. You can also chat with other attendees at any time by clicking on the group chat button, and you can share what you're learning with your Twitter network by using the hashtag #GRNBZ. And now on to today's discussion. Last year, the Western U.S. suffered its most devastating wildfire season to date, and it's one that experts fear could be the new normal. How can society and the business world go about restoring burned landscapes could make all the difference in whether new forests last. Among the things we'll consider today are how corporations can use their resources and influence to help reforest in a climate-smart way, what benefits business can expect from their participation, what do you get out of this, and why supporting reforestation designed for the future helps grow back forest for the long term, creates jobs, and helps sequester and store carbon. Joining me today, we have some really terrific speakers. Britta Dyer is California State Director of American Forests. Give a nod. Luis Vidal is Forestry Fellow at Sierra Corps. And Max Scher is Head of Clean Energy and Carbon Programs at Salesforce, and he'll be sharing some news with us before the Q&A period at the end of this discussion. But before we get started, I would like to ask you a question. We'd like to get you thinking about this topic. The question today is, have you lived in an area impacted by wildfire? And as I was thinking about this as we were getting started, I'm in not the place that you would think of. I'm on the East Coast in northern New Jersey. And I actually have to admit that last year was a pretty dry year here. And many of the days that I was getting ready to go out and take my walks, I would see wildfire alerts. So I definitely was impacted by this area. So I'm wondering what you folks are seeing. Have you lived near an area impacted by wildfire? Yes or no? And I think we're going to go to the responses here for you. Wow, actually, I'm surprised that it's not higher, but definitely it's an issue that we're all thinking about. And with that, I'm going to hand the discussion over to Britta Dyer to start our conversation today. Britta, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. Let me do a quick check. Are you seeing me move the slides?
Absolutely.
Great.
There you go.
Perfect. So, as Heather noted, my name is Britta Dyer. I serve as the California State Director at American Forest. The California office is based right in the heart of the Sierras on the Sierra National Forest. The Sierras provide about 60% of water for the state. And I've had the pleasure of serving for about 2 years now. I moved to the area back in 2009 as an AmeriCorps alumni, where I volunteered for a natural resource nonprofit. But with that, let's dive into today. I want to make sure and tell you just a little tidbit on American Forest. So American Forest is the oldest conservation organization in the country. We come in at just over 145 years old, and we help restore forest on public and private lands with public and private funds. And we do all of this to benefit water, wildlife, people, and climate. And so today I'm hoping to talk to you about not just how to build back, but to how to collectively build back after wildfire. So in our short time together, I'm going to briefly highlight the current conditions in California and the Greater West, the tools and solutions that we have on the ground, and then these innovative public-private partnerships. So when I thought about how to start off, how to kick off and really communicate what things look like in California and the greater West right now. A number of statistics, graphs, slides, everything came to mind, but I couldn't shake this one photo that kept coming to mind. This is it. This is a photo of the Thomas Fire. It was taken back in 2014. This fire became about 300,000 acres. This was taken on my husband's cell phone camera, right? He is a career wildland firefighter for the Forest Service, and he snapped this right around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I remember thinking, what a rare event, a rare occurrence that this moment in time was, right? The Thomas Fire, all the complex fires that followed. But as you know, not a rare situation anymore, right? We're seeing photos like this more and more across, not just in California, but across the greater West. Colorado had its top 3 largest wildfires this year alone. Oregon had its most destructive wildfire season on history with over 4,000 homes lost. And Washington had its 2nd largest wildfire season in regards to acres. So really, it's not just California. It is the greater West. And when we take a look at the vulnerability maps that we're seeing, like this, it's going to get worse, folks, right? This map actually communicates what we anticipate climate change doing on the ground and the likelihood that wildfire will increase in those areas. And so when you look at where we've been, Thomas Fire, and where we're going with this vulnerability map, what you're seeing is really the onset of a Western forest crisis. I want to pause here for a moment. We're going to walk through this diagram just briefly, but I just want to give a plug to really the original stewards of the land, right? The Native Americans. They used to manage in a meaningful way for generations. And then about 3 or 4 decades ago, we actually stopped fire on the landscape. We started suppressing wildfire, which actually hurt forest conditions. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this. When we start with number 2, what we see is that healthy forest that we used to have when it was managed by the natives. It's also where we want to go. But looking at number 2, if you follow that down to number 4, when wildfire hits that landscape, what you still have is a healthy system, a system that can grow back, be diverse, has a number of different tree species at different age that can provide different habitat for wildlife. But the conditions that we have today actually look more like box number 1, right? An overly dense forest. Because we've suppressed wildfire, we've had so many different shoots come up that it just ignites. It ignites and the fire goes all the way up the stem and is able to go out. And really what you see is number 3, right? Where we have the impacts of catastrophic wildfire. And it's truly devastating. We lose everything. So when you think about the fire discussion today, just know that there is this role of good fire and bad fire. So as if the Western forest crisis wasn't gloomy enough here, in California, we've really had a number of other challenges associated with tree mortality, pest outbreaks, as well as drought conditions. Together, that perfect storm really resulted in over 162 million dead trees in a 5-year time period, right? That perfect storm, I also have been referencing as the bomb fire that became the wildfire season of 2020. You don't have to read this in detail, but this is a document that CAL FIRE produces every year. It's the top 20 wildfires in state history, and you will see the ones in red. We had 6, folks. 6 of them occurred in 2020. Of those 6, that equals about 2.6 million acres, or 2.5% of the entire California landmass. That would be like putting together Delaware and Rhode Island and lighting it on fire, okay? Of these 6, 5 of them were what we call complex fires. So these are fires that actually burn together to make a larger fire or a complex fire. Only one of them on this list, which is number 4, was a single fire, and that is the Creek Fire. And I do want to take a moment to note the Creek Fire. So the Creek Fire occurred in my backyard here on Mesilla National Forest. It is the single largest wildfire in California history, and that came in at about 380,000 acres. Just for a point of reference, when a fire is about 100,000 acres, we call it a mega fire. So this was nearly 4 times that. And while I was lucky enough to come home, many folks on my street were not, and in my surrounding communities, actually about 800 homes were lost in total, which honestly, it is a complete miracle that only 800 were lost. But anyway, this is just truly a sneak peek of what it feels like and looks like on the ground for all of us living through it. This photo of me on the bottom left is taken about day 16 of a month-long evacuation. And I've got to use this as a teachable moment, okay? So in the bottom left here, what you're seeing is that same slide on day 16 of my evacuation and the smoke in the background, right? But then in the top, what I want you to note is the smoke when good fire is put on the landscape, right? So this is low intensity fire that truly creeps across the landscape, picks up the litter, encourages native grasses to grow back. It really is a good thing, right? So good fire can create that good smoke that we want, and bad fire or catastrophic fire is really the public safety concern that we have around smoke impacts. So just wanted to plug this one more time. We do know that using fire as a tool is what we call TEK, or traditional ecological knowledge, that the natives have provided to us. And also, I just wanted to plug one of my mentors here, Ron Good. He is the chairman of the North Fork Mono tribe, and he's always saying that the forests are like a garden and that the natives would manage them and that we have to get back and do that, right? The people took care of them. So he always encourages us to look at it from that perspective. So why restore forests? Well, if you drink water or eat food or care about public safety or recreation opportunities, let alone our robust workforce and economies here and natural resource-based tourism, there's a whole suite of reasons, right? But I do just want to point out that restoring forests, right, and being able to do reforestation it has a huge impact to be able to mitigate climate change, right? But let me pause there. It's not a silver bullet solution. It is not. There's a number of other things that we need to do, but it can actually help reduce emissions by about 15% in the United States. So how do we do this at American Forest? Well, this is our niche, right? We do the on-the-ground forestry. We apply that to climate-smart science on the ground from the beginning to the end of a project, and then we link that back to policy. And the point there is linking it back to policy, we're able to identify those bottlenecks and unpinch them so that we can scale up the good work on the landscape. In California, this is what this can look like, right? We have to be able to restore resiliency. And I just want to pause here again and think about what restoring resiliency means. This is a holistic obligation we have, right? We have to manage for this living system at all times. We have to use every tool in the toolbox, and it can look different on one forest in California or another. It can look different on a different slope or aspect on a certain mountain. But what we do know is that we need to be doing a number of things, right? And that's planting trees, cutting trees, starting fire, and stopping fire. It's a living ecosystem. We truly have to use all those tools to restore resiliency on the landscape. And one way that we do that at American Forest is through the use of innovative tools. And so I'm just going to highlight two of them here, where we have the Reforestation Hub, which helps us identify those needs, and then 1T.org, which helps us secure pledges or commitments to be able to fund those needs. So the Reforestation Hub, this was recently released in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. It's already identified 3.9, almost 4 million acres of reforestation opportunity in California alone. That's 1.2 billion trees. Just to lay that out, that's 4.81 million tons of CO2 per year, or the equivalent of removing 1 million cars off the road. So we're able to use this tool, get down to the scale, provide it to local governments, and really see where we need to get in and do the work. Then, coming back to securing pledges, there's 1T.org. This is an international campaign led by the World Economic Forum, and they go through and identify a specific partner for each chapter. So the U.S. chapter of 1T.org is actually American Forest. And so we are the ones that go ahead and work with all the other public and private investors that want to link to those needs, like the Reforestation Hub, to create on-the-ground solutions. I do want to say that since we started, I think we started in August of 2020 with 1T.org, and we have had over 45 pledges that basically we're right at the 1 billion mark right now, right? And that's to conserve, restore, or grow trees on the landscape and planting 1 trillion trees by 2030. So I just wanted to plug this in, put this in here in case you were like, okay, well, good. We've already got 1 billion in the queue, right? Look, you guys, our need is vast. Double, right? The 2020 year alone, we doubled the acres on the ground. So we had almost 10,000 fires in 2020. It was about 4.2 million acres that burned, and that was about $1 billion of property damage and suppression costs. So just hands down, we have our work cut out for us. On that note, what does our work look like on the ground? just going to highlight one of our projects here. This is our campfire project, or what we like to call as our reforestation lab. This is where we're really able to roll up our sleeves, look at the campfire in a meaningful way, and apply meaningful climate smart solutions on the ground. On the bottom left, you see my colleague at the Butte County Resource Conservation District. This is our place-based partner, right? They have the local knowledge. As a national nonprofit, we don't come in and say, this is how you need to be doing something. We really pull from that local knowledge to say, hey, you've had this relationship with the land for how long? What can you tell us about it, right? On the right, what you're seeing is my colleagues at BLM, where we're actually doing a technique here called assisted migration. This is just one of our climate smart menu items here, but what that means is in the background, you might see that there used to be ponderosa pines on that landscape. They burnt up, and the land is telling us that the oaks are actually regenerating pretty good, right? So we're assisting with that migration as the oaks are moving uphill instead of trying to go back and plant what was there, using the climate smart modeling to be able to say, hey, what's going to do good here for years to come? What is the landscape already telling us? And so that's just a little sneak peek to one of the items that we do in our climate smart model, but my colleague Luis will be talking a little bit more about that. My last point on this is, look, restoring a fire scar is complex, right? Here's a fire scar, and you might have BLM, Forest Service, private landowners. Well, guess what? Birds fly each way, right? Water runs downhill. Yet they each have their own way of potentially moving forward. And so thanks to our creative funders that we're able to actually host what we call a climate conversation. We bring all of them to the table with different specialists and scientists, such as the Climate Hub or Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And we dive into the details. You guys, climate science is being born as we speak, and it's being reborn every day. We learn something new every day. Every time we monitor, we learn something new. And so being able to host these collaborative climate conversations, we're really able to have some difficult discussions about what the landscape's going to look like and how we're going to manage it. And I did just want to put a quick plug, so for this project, we have Salesforce that's funding it. And what's helpful is that being able to really unpack every layer of that, not just go in and plant seedlings and leave, right? But really all those different dynamics that I just talked about. That's just the key of having a public-private partnership. So I will let my colleague Luis talk a little bit more about what implementing climate smart reforestation looks like on the ground. I just wanted to highlight that it's not as simple as it may seem, right? Between site selection, making sure you have diverse species types, thinking about resilient genetics, there's a whole skew of things that have to be considered when you're reforesting. But with that, in the last 25 years, American Forest has planted about 8.5 million trees. However, we know our work, we still have cut out for us. And the only way we can do that, I'm going to wrap us back around to that word that we started with this today, collective. Collectively, it's the only way forward, right? And that means that every single person, a land manager, a nonprofit, a place-based partner, a private entity, a corporation, everybody has a unique role to play in order to scale this up. And I just wanted to leave you with one last thought. Yes, coming back to this photo here, you know, this really highlights the wicked conditions of today, right? This is what we're dealing with. But I just want to point out up in the right-hand corner there, that light coming through. I really believe that together we can create a brighter light for forest health and resilience. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions or dialogue you may want to have.
Thank you for that personalized and really thoughtful presentation. I just learned so much. I'm taking notes here. I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm supposed to be focusing on you. I have one quick question before we move on to Luis. You mentioned the Restoration Hub. I'm just curious what other sorts of data and technologies are helping catalog what's going on and helping catalog the progress.
Yeah, so that was the Reforestation Hub recently released with the Nature Conservancy, which helps us identify where we need to plant, what we need to plant, et cetera. And that really is down to the local level, local scale, which hasn't been done before. But there's a variety of other challenges and needs right now. Just for example, we just recently released a journal article that talks about all the complications in and around nursery capacity, right? We can decide where we need to replant, but being able to even have the nursery capacity to scale up in a meaningful way, or guys, you know, seeds, we have to be able to do seed collection in a meaningful way to even have them, get them off of the landscape, to bring them to a nursery, to grow them for a year, to then, there's a whole system in place. And so between that and then some of the other climate modeling that Luis will unpack, it's just never ending. So any sort of partnerships and support, whether that's even, IT support or data collection, we need it all, right? Collectively.
Super. Thank you for that. So that was a great entree for Luis. We've got more questions for you later, and they're coming in. But Luis, why don't we hear from you first? Thank you.
Thank you, Britta. Thank you, Heather. And hello, everyone. I'm Luis Vidal. I'm the Sierra Corps Forestry Fellow based on the El Dorado National Forest, which is where I'm standing in those pictures, and with American Forests. They're my two co-host site for my position. And I work primarily on the Kingfire burn scar. It's a 97,000 acre burn scar that you see on the map on the right. And it was really one of the first unique megafires, modern megafires that we have now in California. They had vast media coverage at the time. It was an unprecedented in size, and most notably, it grew very fast and large as well. You can see by the colors on the map that you have a mosaic of green and blue and red. The red areas are the areas of highest severity, blue is moderate, and green are lower severity. So you have that large red area to the north there. Most of that area burned in less than 48 hours. So this was a fast-moving, fast-progressing, high severity. The final total was over 50% of the wildfire was at high severity, meaning that 50% of the areas in there had a complete loss, total mortality of all tree species in it. And that complicates things for natural regeneration in that if there's no seed source and if there's no trees to provide a seed source, no remaining survivors, then you're not going to have trees coming back. And so that's the area of my work where I do a lot of monitoring. I also do field work as well. There on the bottom left, I'm removing some shrubs, doing some manual work. So I'm here to talk about a little bit more about what goes on the scenes of planting trees and reforesting a wildfire. So one of the first processes and steps that you have to take is site selection. So here in the Sierra Nevada, we're a north-south trending mountain range, about 70 miles wide, over 140 miles long. So we're narrow but steep. And so you have these different elevational bands that you see on the left, on the picture on the left. And in the area of this plant, in the area of the Kingfire, you have up to 2,000 feet of elevational difference, if not more. Here you see at the bottom of the canyon, and then the top is about 2,000 feet higher. So this greatly affects microclimates and species composition, diversity, and which species you can plant in those areas. So this has to be taken into consideration for when you're selecting sites and what species composition and where they're going to be sourced and how and for what climates, microclimates they're adapted to. All those have to be factored in with the elevation as well. And then on the right, we have a map for site selecting based on aspects. So you have different aspects. Green is north. You have south and red, east and purple, and so on. So with the aspects, different aspects have different vegetation types because of microclimates. You have greater humidity on north and east facing slopes, just based on the position of the sun. The sun's mostly hitting the southern and western slopes harder than it is slow slopes. So those western and southern slopes are drier. So this also has to be taken into consideration as well. Different seedlings, different tree species do better in different types of aspects than it would otherwise. And so this is also another consideration as well. Here we have some actual in-field pictures of the burn scar you saw earlier, the Kingfire. And you can see it's large. It's a great area to cover. And two, there's a great variation in topography and aspects and elevation, both are the factors that have to be included. And so as you can see on the picture on the left, not all areas are planted. And that's for a lot of times it's strategic. Some areas are left behind because it would be unfavorable for planting, while other areas that are more favorable, more strategic to reforest are chosen instead and prioritized to be planted. And one of the strategies for planting is cluster planting. So there's a vast menu of how to plant trees on a landscape. You can plant them in neat organizational squares and lines, or you can have a variation of cluster planting. And this is just one variation of it. You can have 12 trees in the middle there. You can change up the spaces and distances. But just for a visual example, here's a method that has analogs to other forests that have had fires remaining on their landscape. And it's where you clump a certain number of trees. Here in this example, we have 6 seedlings, and then you space that out from other clumps of seedlings as well. And it's innovative and climate smart in that there's research being done on it that this format can provide greater wildfire resiliency and also greater climate resiliency as well for future forests, which we know that at the elevations that we're planting, you have to address, as Britta touched on, with assisted migration for future climate dynamics changing. So from either what we have now today to potentially a drier and warmer climate. And here we can see some of the actual in-site planting here. You see amongst the dead shrubs, you have a lot of ponderosa pines, a lot of pine seedling species. Those are probably 3 to 4 years old. Yeah, they're clustered together. And there's method to planting there that goes on. Then we also have species diversity and selection. So different species can, as mentioned earlier with the site selection, do better in different sites. And then also different species do better to just different characteristics as well. One forester I heard put it as it's kind of like diversifying your portfolio. There's all sorts of challenges that will face the forests of the future, from drought to insects to wildfires, again, coming and returning on the landscape. And so different species have different strengths. Some species are more resistant to wildfire, others to drought, others to insects. And so by diversifying your landscape, diversifying your portfolio of reforestation, you can create a more resilient forest that will stand up to these challenges and into the future. And here's a little breakdown of some of those species as well. The key idea being that, again, diversifying the species on the landscape is a climate smart strategy in creating a more resilient forest, using the different strengths that each species of trees has within them. And I'd like to end a little bit on what kind of you've seen a lot of dead forests in the last slides. So we have an alive forest here that provides a kind of an example of a healthier forest. You have larger trees, smaller trees, lower ground shrubs, whatnot. And we'd like to see a lot of our burned landscapes now that you just saw return to forests like these. I'd like to acknowledge the funders of my position and the program I work for, Bella Vista Foundation, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, the U.S. National Forest Service, and the Sierra Core Forestry Fellowship Program.
Super, Luis. Thank you for your time today. I have a question for you. As obviously you're referencing the very unique landscape that you were just talking about, but which of these techniques are replicable elsewhere? Like, how do you look at each site and decide what you're going to do? What resources are you using to make decisions about the species selection or what have you? I mean, how do you scale that?
Yeah, a lot of it's based on data that there are data sets available for. There's a lot of good data sets available for the state of California. California has a lot of resources when it comes to reforestation, but for the nation as well. Britta touched on one of them with the Reforestation Hub. So there's a challenge of accumulating all this data and distributing it out amongst all organizations involved in reforestation. But the more we can do so and make data accessible, the more you can have climate smart reforestation happen. And then there is also, I'd like to mention, a lot of research going on into this right now, into a lot of the specifics that will be coming out soon. And we all look forward to seeing what they provide and how they can inform land management on the ground. Great.
Well, we have a lot of questions coming in, so you're going to be on the hook later. We're going to go to Max Max Scher from Salesforce in a moment here. But before that, we have some questions for you, the audience. We have another poll for you. Are you interested in climate smart reforestation as a sustainability initiative for your company? We're about to hear some good reasons why you should be from Salesforce in a moment, and exactly how they're taking a look at that. But yes or no, for those of you on this webcast, we would like to know what your perspective is on this. And I'm going to go to the answer now. I hope it's a yes, because you're all here. Yeah, there you go. So thank you. And you just prospected yourselves. Thank you very much. So I'm going to spend some time here with Max, who's been good enough to join us from Salesforce. And you've been very active. Your company's been very, very vocal about this priority for some time, since most visibly since January 2020, when you partnered with the World Economic Forum to announce 1T.org. But I'd like to go to your own goal, because I know you have some updates, Max. Your company has committed to growing to conserving, restoring, and contributing to the growth of 100 million trees by the end of 2030, this decade. What has happened in year one of that commitment? I think you have some news for us.
Yes. Thanks, Heather, and thanks for the awesome presentation, Louis and Britta. I'm happy to say that it's been a year of a lot of learning. And one of the great things that we were able to accomplish during that learning was also getting to work. And I'm happy to say that we have our first 10 million trees funded this year. Some of those trees, including at the campfire restoration site, have started to be grown. A lot of interesting learnings from how we got to this 10 million trees, but I think we'll probably get into that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I want to go actually just stick with this for a moment. You mentioned the fire here in the United States, but it looks like you're obviously working in other countries. Can you address that a little bit? Well, how do you prioritize those places?
Absolutely. We really sought some diversity in the portfolio for this first 10 million trees. And we really wanted to learn as much as we could about the different, including the different kind of financial mechanisms and ways that we could support, also the different types of activities that can conserve, restore, grow forests around the world. So, the five highlights here kind of paint the picture for the variety that we, explored with this first 10 million trees funded through a series of grants. Just so folks know, you can go to actually salesforce.com/trees or trees.salesforce.com, take the same place, and we have a map of all 19 projects around the world. Folks can dive in. You can actually support several of them as well, I think including the campfire restoration project directly from that site. They vary widely in geography, even in specific geographies, like take the U.S., where we did a good portion of the 10 million trees as in support of the launch of the U.S. chapter of 1T.org that Britta was talking about. Mm-hmm. Even there, we're doing supporting some assisted natural regeneration, which is really letting the landscape do what it does best, with a little bit of help from some folks on the ground, including American Forests, as well as direct restoration of post-fire areas, and restoring. If we go all the way to the Scotland project that we did with Natural Capital Partners, they're actually restoring former farmland that's going to be mixed use, multi-purpose woodland that people can go and enjoy and explore. And a big part of that was so we know, what are the barriers for all the different types of restoration that we need across all these different landscapes, and we've tons more to learn. But the good news is that there's great folks out there doing great work already that can use our support.
Yeah. And is actually, this is sort of, again, builds on that update you just gave us, because your goal is to conserve, restore, and mobilize the growth, right? So is restoration pretty much the main focus of your efforts right now as far as supporting this, looking at where there has been degradation or wildfires and so forth?
This first 10 million trees is almost exclusively restoration or growth. So, a key piece of this whole puzzle for the world is conservation. And we actually do a lot of that through our carbon credit programs as part of our own net zero operations and other commitments. And we felt like we kind of understood that space a little bit. The restoration space was a little newer for us. So we kind of focused a lot of the efforts of this first 10 million or so trees there. But yes, the goal is conservation, restoration, and growth. And, we say 100 million trees for our goal. The global effort 1T.org is 1 trillion trees over the decade. But really, I mean, we have I like to think of it as kind of a 4 trillion tree goal. The world once had 6 trillion. We fed and clothed a lot of people, and now we have 3 trillion. And if we can get another trillion back, so a gain of 1 trillion trees, we'll be doing a lot to combat climate change and support livelihoods and biodiversity and all those other great things.
Great. So what benefits does Salesforce see in terms of carbon emissions reductions or other climate strategy benefits from doing this? What are you seeing? How do you talk about this?
Yeah. Well, so, when it comes to climate specifically, which is a little bit of what brought us to, this space, we've been, pursuing our own emissions reductions projects for quite some time. We have a 1.5 degree science-based target and prioritize that. But a critical piece of the puzzle here is mobilizing additional finance for these projects around the world. We have a big shortfall in the capital flows to these great things in the world. Nature, 30% of the climate solutions this decade, but only 3% of climate finance, a bit of a mismatch. So since 2017, in order to have net zero operations, provide our customers with a carbon neutral cloud, we've been supporting almost entirely nature-based solutions to climate change through our carbon credit purchasing programs. So, that's one, major benefit. Beyond that, of course, there's, the ever, growing pressure on companies to act. But that's not what gets me up in the morning, right? It's that there's a huge opportunity here to improve lives, whether it's water or it's biodiversity, a lot of the natural ecosystems that we depend on. I think, a lot of companies have an opportunity to do this within their supply chain in a way that adds resilience, in a way that improves, their own ability to operate. And I think that's something that, should be prioritized for sure. For Salesforce, we're a tech company, so we think about that. We think about it in our supply chain. But really, this is about getting capital out the door to support other efforts around the world.
Great. Got 2 more questions before we move into the general Q&A.
Yeah.
Thinking about the last year, what are some of the most important lessons from thinking about this and mobilizing against this goal that you could share with the corporate audience on our webcast today? What would you tell them not to do, and what would you tell them to do?
I think the number one thing is when we're thinking about a global goal like natural ecosystem restoration, conservation, or climate change, we can't just think of it as a one kind of pathway that we're taking to tackle it. It's a multifaceted problem with multifaceted solutions. And I think the number one thing, if you're starting this effort, is to think about not just, well, what's the big headline I can get with this? What's the number I want to shoot for? Although we have a 100 million tree target, the program is really about what's the full power of Salesforce that we can bring to this global conundrum. And, we think about policy advocacy, think about your supply chain, think about, your ability to influence. And for us, we think about our technology too. And there's a lot that I think we can do in that space. So I hope companies will do that as they tackle the space. The other great thing that I'd say is good news is there's a bunch of great folks out there doing great work that need money to do more of the awesome stuff that you heard about today from Britta and Luis. We think that there's a huge amount of those folks to support. So that's one lesson. On the flip side is there's not nearly enough of them. So we also, at the same time as we find the American forests of the world out there and support them, we need to be helping them and each other, build capacity in the space. Like 1 trillion is an insane number. And, our climate goals similarly are, massive. So the more that we can do to help people enter the space, to build capacity, to get the learnings from this webinar out there in the world are going to be critical to scale. But no reason not to get to work today.
Great. Thank you for your insight. And we're going to move into the general Q&A now. There's a lot of really great questions, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for each of you to answer a couple of these. I will try to direct them very specifically if we do have those kind. But I'm going to start first with one that seems to be, I think I'm going to start with Luis and Britta on this one, because there's a lot of them along this theme. But is there enough projected supply of native trees and plant species for restoration of these areas? Who are the big suppliers currently? So can you address the supply, the sort of nursery and how we can build capacity issue here? Britta, why don't we start with you on that one, please?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. It is a complex answer. In fact, just even a few weeks ago, we didn't have all the answers to that. So I mentioned earlier that climate science is being born and reborn every day. That's truly the case here as well. But we did just recently release a study I mentioned, right, and had to do with all of the different barriers, right, to the reforestation pipeline throughout the United States. And a big chunk of that is actually having the seeds available. And so, like for instance, a pine cone will open up maybe after a low intensity fire and drop some seeds, being able to actually have bodies out there in the right time of year with the right weather and a changing climate to be able to get out there and actually harvest those, then getting them over to nurseries, which we know that our infrastructure for nurseries is lacking, to say the least. Quite some time ago, a number of them closed, and we're seeing now with all the fires that really a huge opportunity to ramp production back up. But there is going to be a pinch point and a bottleneck because there's just not enough spaces. There's also not necessarily enough technical expertise on the ground, right? So, and remember, we're doing all of these in these windows that change every year due to weather, right? We're, in fact, some of the planting that we're just starting to ramp up for this week, next week, and the following weeks into April, got a huge snowstorm coming in this weekend. And all of a sudden we've got to kind of change everything. So it's this ongoing conundrum. But really, I would say that being able to get the correct type of species and seeds, being able to then get them to the nurseries that are low capacity, being able to have the technical expertise to be able to grow them in a meaningful way, and then connecting them with those partners on the ground where transportation has to be coordinated. And then you want to get it in there right in the right window, that opportunity where the soil is wet enough to be able to really take, but not so wet that there's snow, and not so dry that they won't have enough moisture. So it really is a complex situation. In fact, maybe we can drop the link to that study in.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Luis, do you have anything to add?
To add to that too, specifically nurseries grow seedlings for different environments, as I was indicating with my presentation. Mm-hmm. So there are tree species. So take, for example, ponderosa pine, grown for specific seed zones, specific elevations, say only 4,000 feet. While here on the Sierra, we have elevations from 8,000 feet to 2,000 feet. So there is a range of abundance of the type of seedlings that they can provide as well. And that all provides further constrictions to the reforestation pipeline as well. Right.
Max, I'd love actually your perspective on this, because I think you've been thinking about the nursery supply part of this a bit. Like when you think about the partners you'd love to support, like, because there's not enough of them, who are some of those types of companies or organizations you'd like an opportunity to help support?
Well, specifically on the nursery capacity, lessons learned this year, one of which has been through the U.S. chapter of 1T.org, just like the spotlight on the need for increased nursery capacity. At Salesforce right now, we're not directly supporting those nurseries, but I think it's one of the critical things to figure out, especially as we think about things like carbon markets and the need to scale those and their ability to support some of these efforts. A lot of these investments that need to happen in order for that to reach the scale that you're seeing in the Mark Carney task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets, the potential there. In order to reach that, we got to find a way to fund these things much earlier on in the process. Fund things like nursery capacity and capacity of implementers on the ground. It's not something that we've solved yet, but absolutely critical.
Okay, great. I'm going to lob this one out there for anyone who wants to take it. How can government do more to initiate climate and fire resistant strategies? Anyone want to jump on that one?
I'll take a plug at it from a California angle. I will say that the leadership of state support's huge, right? Whether that's state government or local government. So in California, we have a really innovative approach with the governor's forest management task force that I've been able to be a part of since about 2015. But at that leadership level, they just released a climate action plan that outlines over 100 tasks that will be implemented by different state agencies to be able to scale up what this looks like, right? And having that leadership from the top saying, this is what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, and who's going to do it is key. However, back to that word collectively, right? They can't do it alone. They can have these mechanisms and look at things from a regional scale, but really being able to also have from the bottom up is really where the success is going to meet. So what we're also seeing is local governments really dive in and have a new level of investment, right? Like, so a lot of counties, if they didn't have owned forested land or park, may not have had even a natural resources department even 5 years ago. Or when tree mortality hits, and now with wildfire season, et cetera, we're really seeing this nexus of local government and state government coming together to the point where there's tools, whether it's for rural counties, or it's the Institute for Local Government, California State Association of Counties. You have just really a plethora of organizations that are all making forest health and resiliency a top priority. So it's going to be really interesting as a social scientist to be able to watch this and where this goes in the next few years. But I do think that we're on to something, that there's a bit of a shift in this pendulum, right, at this moment.
Anyone else want to address that at all?
Yeah, I'd like to add that there's definitely an opportunity for having a greater workforce too. There are hundreds of thousands of acres of land, especially after the 2020 wildfire season that we just had, that are going to need all hands on deck, more people, more experts in this field, in all sectors, that will need to address this growing issue. And so there's an opportunity here for government, and any other organization that is interested in restoring these natural landscapes to their full potential, to put more people on the ground, put greater resources into these efforts, and that's on all parts.
Yeah, so actually, I'd love to follow up on that part of it, because it was a question that I was going to ask: is how could this be a job creation opportunity? We know that coming out of this COVID crisis, there's a hunger for new jobs, especially those related to the clean economy. And this seems like just a great example of something that could have immediate impact and would be so helpful. So are there resources or things happening on that front that others can address? Britta, you're nodding. I don't know if there's anything specifically you want to mention.
Yeah, great question. And again, it's this moment in time, the opportunity right now, right? With folks in DC looking at different stimulus packages and bills, we're seeing the energy around workforce really, really scale up due to COVID and other things. And so there's a number of tools that have come down the pipeline in the last year or two, and I imagine there'll be more to come. Just want to highlight that a couple things. One, American Forest actually helped create the CCCs back in the day. And so our leadership is having a number of conversations of what that may look like in today's world, right? In the circumstances of today and how we scale up throughout forest health in the country. But also there's a number of innovative core groups out there. So, Luis works with American Forest and El Dorado National Forest through the Sierra Nevada Sierra Corps program. There's also a climate core group. There's also a grizzly core group. We're also even seeing these core groups pop up in our cities as well, and workforce there. So, I mean, that's not a direct answer. The answer is that it's ripe. It's ripe right now, and there's not a day that passes that this conversation isn't coming up, and back to a conversation with the state in the coming weeks on this as well.
Is that a lens that you use, Max, as you're picking projects?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a critical, forests in general, are a bouquet sustainable development solution, right? I mean, we have the opportunity to not just address climate change, biodiversity, water risk, but improve people's livelihoods in the process. So we definitely, when we're considering what projects to support, we're specifically looking at who are the local entities that are involved? Are the local communities being, both served and participating in the process of reforestation or conservation or restoration? Because it has to be done, in concert with those people for its long-term success, for sure. Broader than that, though, we're very keen on, concepts like the Conservation Corps as a way to get people, back to work, even in places like the U.S., doing, with all the same benefits. Would love to see more action on it, and I think we have that potential in the current political climate we find ourselves in. So it's super exciting.
Great, thank you. Building on this topic, there's a question on community climate adaptation. So as you look at these projects, how do you consider the integrated risk lens, right? And what integrated risk lenses do you use to look at this? Forest fire risk mitigation, flood, heat, so those are other factors that could pertain. So how is that, the climate adaptation in general used as a lens on these projects? Someone want to start us?
One thing I really appreciate from the California lens is our leadership, the state leadership in regional approaches. So how we would answer that would really depend on the regional scale, right? Things don't necessarily look the same on the east side of the Sierras as they do on the south side or even at the coast. And so just recognizing the diversity of ecosystems that we have in California is really important. And then again, tapping in to that level of local knowledge that makes sense. And so I would say that I work with groups and place-based partners that are prioritizing one over the other, just depending on what the ethics and values are and really the restoration goals in that area. There's also a number of efforts going on right now to prioritize local projects to kind of queue up some funding. And the lens that's being used there, again, here's an example of the difference in ecosystem. In the tree mortality zone, right, there's about 10 high hazard counties where those 162 million trees are dead. One thing that we might consider is, are there green spaces? Are there green spaces that actually remain, like little green islands? If so, should we be prioritizing that? Whereas some of those other communities that in the wildland urban interface that just have one way in and out, the priority may very well be Caltrans or county roads, right? Just because that in itself creates a little bit of a fuel break if a fire ever comes through. So I would say that wherever we are in the region really depends on that place-based knowledge, but that there's also a number of tools right there. CAL FIRE and their team has a number of different tools and lenses, as well as the Forest Service. And it's really pulling them all together to make as a decision support tools, and then getting those, linking them up to the projects on the ground.
Anyone else? Okay. And there's so many questions here. I'm trying to figure out which to go to first. This is a philosophical one. This person asks, surely the forests were doing fine before humans came around. Why do you think humans need to do these activities, such as controlled fires, to maintain their health? Luis, do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, mainly due to prior forest management. So starting with the gold rush times into the mid-19th centuries, well, initially there's a lot of logging. And the fundamental difference between logging and wildfire is that logging takes what's big in terms of trees and leaves behind what's small. While normally, historically, pre-humans, wildfire would take what's small, take the smallest trees out, and leave what's big. The larger trees have a thicker bark and are more resilient to wildfire. So the forest had a natural balance for thousands of years. And then once fire suppression started, and then, first logging, and then you lost that different diversity in heights and sizes of trees. And then wildfire suppression that led to densification. You had a higher density and higher concentration of those similar sized trees. Then you have essentially a matchbox ready to light up by trees of all the same size, so they can all catch on fire relatively easily, and they're all dense together, and so they can burn really hot. So it's all a tale of forest management, and so that's why now we are striving and working hard to correct those through reintroducing wildfire. Wildfire has to be one of the integral tools that we use to maintain health, and reintroducing them and restoring as much as we can to that previous balance is key to forest health.
Great. Thank you. We have a question here to go back to the corporate lens here for a moment on offsets. So when you look at these projects, what does the offset scenario look like for a project like this? And are there places that provide offsets related to this sort of work? Does anyone, Britta, do you have a a lens on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can defer to Max and if you have any particular examples, but I mean, in short, our projects don't necessarily provide carbon credits directly, but corporations can voluntarily mitigate their carbon emissions, right, at a corporate level. And so that's like, for example, what Salesforce is doing. And I would just say that the other thing is that, remember how I said that climate science is being born and reborn every day? How we calculate carbon and actually how we're integrating some innovative carbon financing tools is also growing every day, right? So we're working on something right now, I hope we can release soon in partnership with the Forest Service, where we're able to actually look at a fire scar, like almost like an adoptive fire scar sort of a model. So being able to fund multiple layers of the entire problem. So one thing we haven't discussed here yet is some of the challenges that sometimes come into play with the planning dollars that are necessary, right? Environmental planning, so that's NEPA, CEQA in California, and then the implementation, and then the immediate follow-up, and then future follow-up such as prescribed fire. So really this holistic approach and being able to calculate it in that way so that companies and organizations are able to then count that in their offset as well.
Right. Max, can you give a little bit more on this sort of concept in general? Like how are you benefiting from this, if that's the right word? Are you accounting for it?
So for this 10 million trees, all grants, so it's not something that we're, counting carbon credits from. We do expect that some of the projects that we've supported with philanthropic dollars might pursue carbon credits down the line as they scale and look for other forms of capital for, their long-term success. I'm not sure if the question was specific to fires or just kind of reforestation, conservation in general.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, interestingly, I think there are folks working on how fuel management can be part of a, carbon credit issuing scheme, which is super complicated, and I would probably need some other experts on the phone to talk us through the science. But in general, yes, absolutely. I mean, something like upwards of 80% of the carbon credits that are available in the market are nature-based solutions in some way. Our portfolio is similarly reflective of that. I think, reforestation in particular is going to be a big, scaling part of that portfolio, especially as we see there's a bit of a confusion around what is really needed this decade in terms of net zero targets and some things that are happening in that space right now. But in general, definitely feeling increased enthusiasm for it. I'll say, these projects, like there is a wide range of capital that they need of different types at different stages. Britta just mentioned one in kind of some of the early stages. There's also, philanthropic capital that can be provided to start some of these projects. But they're all generally the same thing. We're talking about restoring ecosystems. I'm a fan of whatever gets the money to the thing that makes this happen, right? Just taking a lot from our natural resources over the years. It's, simply just time to start giving it back.
Okay. So I'd like to round robin one last question before we have to close to everyone. And that's just, when you think about the biggest barriers to large-scale reforestation, like seed supply, planting labor, funding, and that sort of thing, what would you like to see the corporate world, how would you like to see them involved? How would you like to see more individuals like Max and Salesforce involved in this movement? Where would the most impact be felt positively right now in where we need to go? Luis, I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Sounds good. I would reiterate my answer to a previous question of workforce capacity. I think we need more people and we need more experts on the ground to address this ever-growing and large issues. So workforce capacity would be my answer.
Max, where would you like to see your fellow companies?
Well, I'd like to see them entering the space. I'd like to see them thinking about a holistic, what can you bring to the table kind of approach that includes their influence, policy advocacy, includes deploying capital, and includes, thinking about their own kind of value chain, supply chain. I think, Luis's point is a good one. When companies are thinking about that holistic approach, think about multiple forms of capital and how they can be used to best serve the given need. Sometimes carbon credits are the answer. Sometimes philanthropy in some ways the answer. Sometimes, there's direct investments that can be made just to get this space, scaling in a good way. And I'd love to see that. And I think there's big potential with that, with net zero targets the companies are making and the growth of the carbon markets. And I think within that world, it's important that we have a mindset of compensating and investing in these solutions along with reducing our emissions. And I think that's, probably that's starting to be par for the course, which I'm really happy about.
Right. Britta, you have the final word on this one.
Well, I mean, Luis and Max both answered that great. Adding to those, I'd say the nursery challenges. But I really think it's changing the conversation, asking private organizations, corporations to get on board with a really complex situation, right? It can be, there's one level of supporter or funder who is willing to hey, let's get these seedlings in the ground, right? To be able to have an impact now. But what we're seeing is that we really need that meaningful partnership, that long-standing marriage to be able to really unpack the climate conversations, to be able to collaborate with the place-based partner, to be able to include the most up-to-date climate science. It's not a silver bullet. So I would just really plead with folks to get on the bandwagon for the long run and be able to unpack some of these challenging issues so that we can really have meaningful impact for years to come.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Britta, Max, and Luis, for your wisdom and for a very lively conversation. And thank you to the audience for so many great questions. Very much appreciate the webcast sponsor, American Forests, for making this happen, and my colleague behind the scenes, Taylor Flores, for making everything run so smoothly. If you would like to rewatch this webcast, the recording will be archived on greenbiz.com later, and our team will email you the link when it is available. You can also check out the resources that we have provided by clicking on the button on in your platform. And they include the Reforestation Hub, as we mentioned previously, a Replanting Paradise article, the California 4th Climate Change Assessment information, the webcast slides, a link also to a couple of our newsletters, particularly Verge, which I help write a couple of times a week, and a link to register for Verge Net Zero, one of our newest online events focusing on the transition to a climate positive future. So with that, I would like to thank you again for coming today. If you'd like to watch more webcasts, please visit www.greenbiz.com/webcasts. And on behalf of my colleagues here at GreenBiz, thank you so much for attending. I'm Heather Clancy. Until next time, take care and be well.